Welcome to Mooney Reads. In this video, I'm going to be talking about the books that I read in April and May. I actually filmed the wrap-up for April quite a while ago. Just haven't gotten around to really putting it together. My hard drive, my external hard drive kind of ate shit. It's been on its last leg for a couple of years, to be honest. So I do have enough space on my computer to probably edit like one at a time. I told myself that I would get a hard drive pretty soon, and I just edited then, and it hasn't happened. So you're just gonna get 2 months worth of books at once. So first you'll see the video of me talking about my April reads, and then I'll be back to talk about my May reads. Welcome to Mooney Reads. Today I'm going to be talking about what I read throughout the month of April. There were several readathons happening throughout April. We had, of course, the Read Queer All Year prompts, but Sapphic September also happened towards the beginning of the month. It was the Disability Readathon throughout the whole month, and Read for Palestine was towards the end. So I kind of based my reading on all of those things, and I ended up incidentally reading all queer books, and it ended up being 10 books. Half of them were from the library, only one of them was an audiobook, and the rest of them were either free or gifted, or had been on my shelf for a really long time and had been used initially, so that's neat. The first thing that I read this month was Basil and Oregano, which is a fantasy YA comic that focuses on this girl who's, I think, in her like senior year at this magic school, and is making friends with this new student. There's a lot of cute stuff in here. I like the magic world. I like that a lot of the characters were really diverse and quirky in their own ways, and certain tropes kind of got twisted a little bit, like the mean girl was a little bit more nuanced and so forth. However, I thought it was short. Like, a lot of it felt really rushed. Like, the relationships and the friendships you didn't really get to see because it was such a short volume. I do like a lot of what they were trying to do with it in terms of like talking about mental health and stuff like that. But ultimately it was just okay. It was cute, but I'm glad that it's one that I picked up from the library instead of buying myself. I read this during Sapphic Spring, and it did fit in the bingo board as both a sapphic romance and a quick read. During Sapphic Spring, I also read This Is What Lesbian Looks Like, Dyke Activist Take on the 21st Century. And this is an anthology that was published in 1999 that has a really diverse array of leftist lesbian voices. And this was just incredible. I think there aren't really in here that I would have skipped. A couple of them either like aged weirdly, or there were specific things that, you know, if they were written now, they probably would have said them differently. And like one that I really wanted more explanation on, but the vast majority of them were just so good. And it actually led me to buying some other really old anthology, or really old, I guess, for books anyways. I mean, some people call stuff that's like 2 years old Backlist. So anyways, other lesbian or queer books from the 90s that these people were also featured in. So this is diverse in terms of like topic. Like, it talks about obviously queerness and identity, but also race and class, disability. There's a broad variety of people in terms of like, there are people of different races and ethnicities, several people with different disabilities, and there were both transmasculine and transfeminine people in here. And the transmasc and transfemme people talked about gender, but so did some of the other folks. It's actually really interesting hearing femme people from this time period, some femme people that I've heard talk about gender. And the person, I wonder if I can remember. It might be Joe Nestle. There's one person in here, and it escapes me which person, but they were also featured in Genderqueer, and they're a femme lesbian, and it was really interesting hearing about their kind of way, like, back into femininity, but also, like, the nuances of their femininity. It's just really, like, not a typical sort of gender journey that you get to see people talk about. So there's a lot of cool stuff in here, and I actually think I am going to do a standalone video on this, really getting into some of this. If I, like, knew what this was and stuff, I definitely would have put it in with my queer independent study. I don't even know what to call it, because DIY class is not exactly accurate, especially the way that it's played out. But I had that basically TBR in the beginning, and this fits really well into it, and I just really enjoyed this a lot. The first book that I read kind of officially for that was a little bit of a flop, so it was nice that this is very good. So I'd like to really dig into a lot of what they're talking about because it was so good, and I just think that this has so many really important points that are still crucial for the things that we're talking about and dealing with today. As much as there are some nuances of, like, the language that might be a little bit dated, there are, you know, certain political situations that are different in detail, but as much as, you know, we don't have the same exact person being president and the same exact war happening, it's still basically the same. And I think that a lot of the nuances that they have in here, a lot of people would benefit from greatly. So anyways, this was just very good. Expect to hear about it again. Like I said, it went for Sapphic Spring, also the Disability Readathon, because it fit that. And Read Queer All Year prompt, lesbian. It talks about lesbians. The next one that I read would also fit for Sapphic September and Read Queer All Year for the same reasons, lesbians. And what I read was The Gifts of the Body by Rebecca Brown. To be clear, the main character, we don't actually even learn their name. We can make maybe some assumptions, but the author is lesbian. So, another Backlist lesbian book that was an incredible read. Very different vibe. Obviously, this is fiction. This focuses on a person who is a nurse's aide for people with AIDS. So she goes to their homes and takes care of them, not in a medical capacity, but helping them clean their house, helping them bathe, etc. And it's told in a series of vignettes, basically different scenes with different people who she's helping. And each chapter is named after a different gift. Sweat, the gift of sweat, the gift of wholeness, the gift of tears, etc., etc. And you see or hear about all of the people from the first half of the book in the second half of the book. This is written in a kind of plain, not overly emotional sort of way, but even still, you really get, I think, the emotion of what's happening. Like, this was a really devastating book, and I think the way that she chose to write it was just really effective. For context too, this was published in 1994. So she likely wrote this on the height of the AIDS epidemic in the United States, when the prognosis was not good at all. And a lot of stuff that's published around this time, you can feel that, obviously. Similar to The Man with the Night Sweats. And, you know, this author Oh, as you get into some of the later stories, you hear how this person, isn't really going to all the meetings that all the other aides go to where they talk about their feelings and stuff. She's really, I think, at an emotional distance that makes a lot of sense for the situation that she's in. And you get that really well out of the way that she writes. It was beautiful and heartbreaking and exactly what it needed to be in a lot of ways. I feel like I remember there being a couple of things in here um as I was reading it that felt a little like there were bits that felt like kind of ableist in different ways, but most of those contexts she was kind of grappling with her own thoughts and her own emotions and kind of like knowing that not all of these are right. But overall, this was just a really good book, and I don't think I can say enough how much people should be paying attention to and reading books that came out of this era and that talk about the AIDS epidemic. And that's going from what actually happened, um, the emotion and the people and, not forgetting, but also, the wider political things that happened, how the organizing happened, how everyone reacted. Not only did it impact society at large, but also like specifically the queer community in just huge ways. But there were so many parallels. I'm rambling. It was a very good book. I would recommend it, and I'm interested to read more from her. After that, or around that time, I've kind of lost my timeline kind of mentally, but I read Love is an Ex-Country, which is a memoir by a Palestinian American woman. She starts with the book kind of talking about her trip that she takes at this kind of pivotal point in her life, and during this trip experiences some really like terrible vitriol online, because when Barbara Bush died, she basically said that I forget the quote, and of course the book isn't in front of me, but basically, she was such a nice racist. Criticizing Barbara Bush, rightfully so. But of course, people came and yelled at her and were racist and fatphobic and all of this. And this starts the trajectory of the rest of the book, where she talks about her life a little bit more at large. She talks about growing up and experiencing abuse in other relationships. So really, I think the common thread throughout the book was the experience, experiencing violence on multiple levels from multiple different people, including systemic violence and colonial violence, not being able to return to where your family is from. But it also talks in a lot of different ways about healing and the different places that she found healing, whether that was through interactions with strangers, through reconciliation with certain people, or choosing not to reconcile at certain points of her life. And at the end, she talks at length about kink and how that impacted her, especially in regards to like her agency and her healing as someone who's experienced sexual violence. So it was a really interesting memoir. It was very compelling. I'd had it checked out physically from the library for a while and just didn't pick it up because my brain is what it is. But I started the audiobook and I read the audiobook in like less than 2 days, I think. So this fit for both Sapphic Spring and the Pages for Palestine readathon. And actually the Queer Lit readathon. It has pink on the cover. So it fit for that prompt. And after that, I read this zine, Queer Voices from the Fight for Palestinian Liberation, which is free online. Earlier this year, I read a series of Palestinian pamphlets and watched a documentary, and I talked about that experience. I found this through the same resource that I found those other ones through. Publishers for Palestine. This one was specifically compiled by Pleasure Pie, which is a collective who does zines as far as I know. I don't know much beyond a cursory glance at their Instagram page, but this was very good. It has some pretty solid essays on pinkwashing, and as well as some poetry, including a June Jordan poem, and some snippets from the Queering the Map project, focusing in on people who have written something about being in Palestine. I would definitely recommend this to people who are wanting to understand some of the rhetoric around Palestine, specifically if you're wanting to learn about pinkwashing. For those who don't know what pinkwashing is, it's basically saying that this country needs to be invaded or changed or what have you because they're horrible to queer people. So in the specific situation with Palestine, there's the idea that Palestinians are terrible to the queer people who are there, therefore it is better that Israel go in and invade them. However, that's not really true. Not only does this excuse the homophobia that happens within the colonizing countries, it is not really looking at what the actual experience of being queer in Palestine is. There's also the fact that if you completely decimate an area, it's not going to matter anyone's sexuality. This sort of thing that we're seeing happening in Palestine is not good for anyone there, and acting as though you're saving people is asinine. But this kind of breaks down a little bit of history, a little bit of the kind of ideas behind this and what it's actually like over there. So I definitely recommend this, and it's free. So you can just look it up on your phone right now if you wanted to. And after that, I finished the Collected Schizophrenias, which is something I read kind of throughout the course of the month. It wasn't a slow read at all. I was just picking it up intermittently. And this is a series of essays that looks at the author's experience with mental health, largely. She has schizoaffective disorder and bipolar disorder. And she talks about her experience kind of going into psychosis and getting these various diagnoses. And she talks about so many different things, from like academia and being forced out of an Ivy League school because of her having experienced psychosis. It talks a little bit about religion towards the end. It talks about her relationship with motherhood, or the idea of motherhood. And it talks a lot about how people with these sort of disorders and these sort of symptoms are treated. So a lot about not just, I think, biases that people have and stuff, but the ways in which people's agency is taken away from them, and how that can hinder them on multiple levels. But this was a really interesting read. I don't think that I've ever seen somebody really talk about the experience of psychosis like this, like in such a personal way. I think you're way more likely to see it used as like some sort of device in a mystery thriller or something like that. So this was very cool. The one kind of issue that I did have with it, in one of these essays, she talks about someone who is autistic, and like it was a little weird. Like there were some choices made. I can kind of see some of the nuance in the ways that she was talking about some of it, because she was also talking about her own relationship with children. But some of it was like not great. And also some of the discussion of like high functioning during that particular section. I don't know. It was a little bit weird, but it was one part of one essay, and the majority of this was really good. And I would still recommend the collection as a whole. Then after that, I'm gonna get into a lot of graphic novels. The last day of April, I was just in a graphic novel mood. So I went through several things. I started out with Brooms, which is a fantasy young adult comic set in the 1930s. And you're focusing in on this group of people who are involved in illegal broom racing. And it's illegal because of the sort of magic that they use. In 1930s America, of course, the right sort of magic is the kind that white people have. And so anyone who is not white needs a certain license in order to use their sort of magic. And these folks are like navigating that. The whole cast of our main characters are people of color. One of them is a trans woman, and several of them are disabled. I liked a lot about this book. I really liked the premise. I really liked how we had this particular sort of historical fiction fantasy. I feel like we don't really get to see that a lot. Um, and I really liked some of the dynamics of the friend group. I thought that was really cool. I did feel like the people who were sort of posited as our main characters were the least developed. Like, I feel like I knew the least amount about them. And I just really wanted to see more. This was not a super short comic book, but it also wasn't particularly long. And I feel like this whole bit that they go into, they could have made it a series. I think with graphic novels, especially like young adult standalones, I always have like kind of mixed feelings because it's like, the publishing world isn't the easiest. So if you only have a standalone or only allowed to have, a certain amount of space, can you please sit? Thank you. They maybe could have made this into a series, but they maybe, couldn't have. I don't know what the situation was. They had a lot of really cool ideas. I just wish it had been fleshed out more, is basically the bit of that. And Brooms ended up fitting for the Disability Readathon. After that, I read The Belle of the Ball, who is by the same author that did, the name of the book is escaping me, but this really cute, like fake parenting, enemies to lovers, one that I read last year that was super cute, between like a beast and a fairy or something like that. So I was really excited to read other things that she had. And Belle of the Ball is also very like tropey and cute. The dedication, I think, really sets the scene. It was to all the gays who were obsessed with High School Musical in middle school. And I just that it really does, it's the cheerleader and the head athlete, I guess you play soccer, are dating, and there's like a little nerdy person who's like wanting one of them, but ends up becoming friends with them. So there are like elements of your stereotypical, I think, teen movie with a lot of like kind of gratuitous amounts of like cheese. It's definitely a little campy. It doesn't take itself too seriously, but it says some really interesting things about friendship and turns some tropes kind of on their head. I will say that this heavily deals with like bullying. I saw this in actually their other one as well. There's like a small scene where there's more like physical violence than I found necessary. Not a gratuitous amount. No one's getting pummeled. Um, but like some slapping that seemed really out of place and out of pocket. That I found a little bit jarring. It could be, worse for some other people. And a lot of people wouldn't even think twice about it. But I thought it was worth mentioning. But excluding that kind of weirdness, I thought it was super cute and neat. It was a fun read. This also fit for the read queer all year prompts twice over, because at least one of the characters, if not all three of them, are lesbian, and it's very pink. Pink is literally the only color, and it was cute. I forgot what order I read these two in. But I'll just go with the other one that's more YA middle grade. And that is Girl Haven. Those last two that I read were, I think, technically YA. I'm pretty sure this one is middle grade. It's set in 7th grade. The main character in this book goes on kind of a gender journey. So I'm just going to use neutral pronouns just since we've got different pronouns going on in the book. But at the beginning, they're kind of making friends with this new group of people. You learn pretty early on that their mom has disappeared. They don't really know where she is. So they end up taking their friends to their house to look at their mom's workspace because it's really cool. It's full of art and full of things about this magical world that their mom came up with that only women are in, basically, and there are these like fantastical magical adventures and stuff. And they end up accidentally getting transported there and they have to go on this adventure. And kind of throughout this, the author is trying to find their mom and is also grappling with their gender. I wanted to like this book so much. I think the premise is really promising. And there are a lot of details that are too. Some of the characters are really endearing. And I think that some of the elements that were put in place have a lot of potential. But I had two big problems with this. One of which is hard to talk at length about without being spoilery. But basically there's some stuff in the middle that I think I knew where the author was going, but it wasn't long enough to really flesh out the details, and it ends up being it kind of reduces, I think, masculinity in a way that's not great. Again, I could see, like, the details of some of the dialogue, so I think maybe she was going in a particular direction, but it wasn't super clear. The other big problem that I have with this is the characterization of the only black character in the story. Like I said, they make friends with this little friend group, these 3 people. 2 of them are very sweet and welcoming and everything. And she is not. She's characterized as like the grumpy friend and is sort of the like hyper feminist, like criticizes the main character when they say you guys in like a way that was really kind of larger than it needed to be. So I just thought it was weird that the only black character was unfriendly and kind of aggressive. That seemed like a racist characterization. While the first element is a matter of like things being muddled and I think could be fixed with a longer story, the second element, just some kind of significant things need to be adjusted. And I don't see how nobody saw that. So that's unfortunate. Then the last book that I have is a single issue comic, Deprog. This is solidly adult. The things that I talked about just now were not. This very much for adults and not for children. This is actually an advanced reader copy that I was sent by the publisher, Dead Sky Press. And so this is the very first part of a lesbian noir that focuses on this private eye, basically, who saves people from cults. I don't want to say too much because it is only like 24 pages, but I really like the premise. The vibes are good so far. I really enjoy the artwork. And this one gets super steamy, like pretty soon off the bat. So I'm interested to see where it's gonna go. And in terms of readathons, obviously read queer all year. At least one of the people on this cover, if not both of them, are lesbian, and it's got pink. So that is all for things that I finished this month. So in May, I only read 4 books. I did work on some things, but overall it was just, I don't know, not as many books, but that's fine. That just happens sometimes. I listened to the audiobook of How We Fight for Our Lives by Saeed Jones. This has been on my TBR for quite a while, and I'm really glad that I finally got to it. I really enjoyed the audiobook experience of reading this. He talks about his time growing up as a gay black boy in the South predominantly. I think he does move around a bit. He spends a lot of time in Kentucky and Texas, as well as some time in Tennessee, and then I think moves up to New Jersey. But still, it's about growing up in the South. This talks a lot about the complexities of his family, and specifically looks at his relationship to a variety of different family members, particularly focusing on his mom, especially towards the end of the book. This was really well written, really touching, so definitely check that one out. I also read a poetry collection, Things You May Find Hidden in My Ear by Mosab Abu Toha. These poems are about his experience as a Palestinian. This was published in 2022, but it's my understanding that a lot of these were written much earlier. And he has been covering on his Instagram currently a lot of the stuff going on. He was able to get out of Gaza, but still has a lot of connections. And hopefully, if you're kind of tuned into a lot of the journalists and different people who've been talking about Palestine and have been in Palestine, hopefully you have seen stuff from him. But this was a beautiful poetry collection, absolutely devastating, but beautifully written. And I liked that there were different things stylistically happening. The first poem has a unique format, kind of going through the alphabet. We have some that are short on the shorter side, some that are quite a bit longer, and there's also incorporation of photographs kind of in the middle that was really striking to me. And I feel like, in general, I feel like I haven't been reading nearly as much poetry. Like I didn't read any in April, even though that's like National Poetry Month. So I'm glad I at least got some in during May. Now, the book that I spent the bulk of the month really reading was It Did Happen Here, an Anti-Fascist People's History. This is a look at the anti-fascist movement in Portland, particularly in the 80s and 90s. So there are a lot of different people that they interviewed, got oral histories from, and each chapter kind of looks at a different theme. It sort of summarizes it in the beginning of the chapter, or kind of talks about some important things, and then kind of goes through segments of these different interviews that relate to it. So through this, I learned a lot about the fascist recent history of Oregon, which I was like, I knew that there was a really big racism problem, and I know that like how the state was formed was like they literally exclusionary towards people of color. But I didn't realize that it was like a hub for like former KKK members and things like that in like recent history. So I definitely recommend this for people who are anywhere in the Pacific Northwest. But also, I think that there tends to be this assumption that the South is the area with the racism problem. No, it really is everywhere. So if you're under the impression that it only happens in the South or in these particular places, I would recommend picking this up. I think that it's also good because it shows kind of how a lot of the organizing was done, both the positives and the negatives. There are quite a few people of color that they interview within this who talk about racism even within these different anti-racist groups. So including things like having a really lack of understanding and not listening, to more issues of systemic racism, like paying attention to who actually is getting arrested when these different actions happen. And you can also see the kind of variety of thought within these different groups, even though they have a tendency to be in a similar place politically, there is still a lot of nuance. So lots of reasons to pick this one up. I really liked it, and I'm glad that I did really focus on it and finish it. The final book that I read in May is Restart After Coming Back Home, which is a manga. I think there are 2 in the series, at least 2 that I've read. One of them I read in June, so you don't get to hear about it yet. But this one was pretty cute. It's a gay manga, as you might kind of guess from the title. The main character comes back to his hometown after having some issues with his jobs, and meets this person who he didn't really know that was in his town, and certain things sort of fall in place. So it's a wholesome slice of life manga, and I enjoyed it. And other than that, I know I did work on some other things in April. There are some things that I started and didn't finish. There are a few things that I picked up and put down when I was feeling a little fussy. I won't talk about those, just because I'm not sure which things I'm actually going to continue in that regard, but I will talk about the 2 nonfiction ones that I am in the middle of. I started Before We Were Trans by Kit Hayam, which is a history book looking at transness, like kind of globally before our contemporary discussion of it. I only got through part of the introduction. So far, so good. I just wanted to start in on reading other things. But that is one that I'm reading. And then I also started Unlearning Shame by Devin Price, which is very good so far. I am also not super far into this, about page 50, but I really like the premise of this, and basically he's going through and talking about this idea of systemic shame. A lot of the times you can hear about shame in the different ways that we can, maybe do self-talk in different ways and set different boundaries, be around different people. And, that kind of works for recovery in certain ways. But then there are certain times where the shame, it isn't just something that's incidental or something that happened to you once. It's something that is in the society and embedded in how we interact with each other, and is something that gets recreated. So he's talking about kind of at the beginning, he's talking about basically the history of shame in American society to kind of lay that groundwork. And then my understanding is that in the rest of the book, he's also going to talk about how to kind of handle being in that environment, how to, like personally, but also how we could change it. We haven't gotten that far yet, though. Right now, I basically heard a little bit of his own personal experience with this, and also some examples of people experiencing systemic shame, which is really helpful. And then he's starting to get in on the history more. I did get through another chapter in No Study Without Struggle, which I've been kind of slowly making my way through. We're close to the end, though. I'm in the last, third to a quarter of it. So, hopefully I'll be able to finish this up in July, perhaps. We'll see. So that is what I read in the month of April. If you've read any of these, let me know what you thought. And tell me about your favorite thing that you read in April. Thank you all so much for watching. Bye.